Students. So today we're going to continue our discussion of dairy products because so far we've been doing some activities like Mind Your Milk. We looked at how to make homemade pudding. Before break, we watched a demo video about how to make a white sauce, and kind of building off of that white sauce video would be what can we add to it to turn it into different things. And one of those items would be cheese, and there's so many different kinds of cheese. So imagine the possibilities of all the different things you could turn a white sauce into based off of all of the different cheeses you would have to choose from. So we're going to look at how cheese is made today just to get a better understanding for it, because it does start to explain a little bit of why we have all the different kinds of cheeses that we see when we go to the grocery store. So first things first, we are looking at the start of cheese, and that would be the separation of curds and whey. So we know that cheese is a concentrated form of milk, and when an enzyme is added to milk, the milk thickens and separates into solid clusters, which are the curds, and a thin bluish liquid called the whey. And for most of our cheeses, we're going to use the curds to make the cheese. So when we see this separation, it is very purposeful. It is not an accident. We want to start using those solids to form new kinds of cheeses. So steps to making cheese, and these are listed on your notes. So all you have to do is just sit back and kind of see the steps in motion here. So our first step, we have receiving and processing of milk. We have our second step, which is the ripening period, which is where they add a starter and color to get the cheese going in the direction of flavor and the kind of cheese they're trying to make. Then the third step is they're going to cut and cook the curd. Fourth, they're going to drain the whey. Fifth, they're going to salt the curd. And sixth, they're going to press it and cure the curd. Now, to say just these steps, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So if you're anything like me, let's look at some pictures, because then it starts to make a little bit more sense. So step one, this is what we could sum up into the milk intake. So basically what happens is we have to go to a dairy farm and we have to get the milk from the cows. So you can see a picture on the left of a very fancy dairy farm setup here, where the cows would be in the different stalls. They have the hookup hoses for the udders, and the cows are going to be milked. And all of that milk goes into a holding tank waiting for a truck to come and pick it up. So on the right hand side, you can see a truck with a cooling tank in the back that's going to pump out all of the milk that's been milked from the cows, and then it's going to take it back to some place for it to be processed and turned into whatever it's going to be. So we know that with quality cheese, we know that we have to have one key ingredient, and that is quality milk. So before the cheese making process even begins, incoming milk is first tested for quality and purity to make sure that it's going to actually make good cheese in the long run. And just a fun little factoid for you, it can take approximately 10 pounds of milk to make 1 pound of cheese, which kind of makes sense when you think of the breakdown of milk, when we have 87% is milk solids and then 13%, or sorry, I have that backwards. 87% is liquids and then 13% is the milk solids. So when you think of only 13% being the milk solids, then yeah, it's going to take quite a bit of milk to get your cheese. All right, step two is standardization. So in this process, the milk is going to be weighed, it's going to be heat treated, or what we call pasteurized, to ensure product safety and uniformity. So here you can see some big pasteurizing tanks on the left-hand picture. And basically what's happening is we have fresh milk coming in from the cow. So the cow has been milked. It's going into some kind of a heating system to kill off any bacteria that could be harmful to us. Example, listeria. We talked about that way back when. And then eventually it's got to be cooled down so that it's not sitting in the temperature danger zone where bacteria would be allowed to live. So once we have that milk cooled, then it's going to be pumped out, and now it's going to be able to be turned into whatever product they are planning on turning it into. All right, step three is where they're going to use starter cultures and coagulants. So, starter cultures, which is also a fancy term for saying good bacteria, they're added to start the cheese making process. So, these starter cultures are going to help determine the ultimate flavor and texture of the cheese. Then, next, a milk clotting enzyme called rennet is added to coagulate the milk, and it's going to turn it into those solid custardy like curds, so we get the separation of the curds from the whey. And I have these two pictures here because you can actually make your own cheese at home, and sometimes you can find liquid rennet and sometimes you can find tablets of it. So if you're ever wanting to try this at home, you could definitely Google how to make your own homemade cheese, and then chances are it might ask you to use one of these clotting enzymes like the rennet tablets or the liquid rennet. All right, step number four is where we have to cut what is going on. So, what's going to happen is we're going to cut up all of these solid curds that are forming in the vats to begin the process of separating the liquid, which is the whey, from the milk solids, which are the curds. So, this is going to help separate the curds from the whey. So, I can see in these pictures here, the left hand side, this is actually somebody making cheese at home. So you can see how they just cut through with a knife, and you can see the curds, and then you can see some of the whey. Now, if you're in a big processing center that's just going to crank out lots and lots of cheese, then you're going to have these big vats or tubs where all of this milk could have been sitting and being processed. And what they're doing is they're taking these bars that have these metal slats that they're just dragging back and forth down this tub to start doing what we see here in the left hand picture to get those curds and whey to separate out. Fun little facts for you here if you're interested. Large curds are cooked at lower temperatures, and they're going to give you softer cheeses like mascarpone or ricotta. And then curds that are cut smaller are cooked at a higher temperature, and those are going to give you harder cheeses like, say, Gruyere or some Romano cheese. Okay, step five is where we're going to stir, heat, and drain. So, cheesemakers cook and stir the curds and whey until the desired temperature and firmness of the curd is achieved. And then, once they've achieved that, the whey is then drained off, which I love this picture here because you can see how they're pressing out the whey. And then they're leaving it into these like tightly formed curds. So, this is what it would look like maybe in a bigger processing facility. But then I like this picture down lower because this shows you how you could actually do this at home. So you would take a strainer with some cheesecloth, and then you're putting the curd in, and then you would just press this down with your hands. So you could wrap up this cloth around it and then just press on the curds, and then the whey is going to drain out down into the bowl like you see here. Okay, step six is curd transformation, and this is where it starts to get fun. So, there's different handling techniques in salting that will affect how the curd is transformed into the many different types of cheeses that we have. So, it's basically going from these little broken down pieces of curd, and then they're starting to kind of bring them together in larger chunks, and eventually it's going to start to get pressed into molds. So, we have cheeses that look typical to what we see in the stores, which is step seven, then, is where they're going to press the cheese. So pressing is going to determine the characteristic shape of the cheese, and it's going to help complete the curd formation so that everything stays together like it should. Most cheeses are pressed in 3 to 12 hours depending on their size. So obviously a larger barrel wheel like what you see here, this is going to take a lot longer to get those cheeses pressed and stay formed together versus maybe a smaller mold such as this one. So lots of different forms that can be used to get your cheese shapes. All right, then step number eight is curing. And depending on the variety and style of cheese, this is where curing is really going to step in. So, curing is used for aging the cheese and helping it fully develop its flavor and texture. The cheese is typically moved into a room, kind of like what you see here in these pictures, that's carefully controlled for required humidity, but also the temperature, because obviously we want things to be in safe temperatures. And then then what's really interesting is that we have cheeses today that have just been pressed into their molds that we're not going to actually be able to buy them in the store until 10 years from now. So imagine that, like today in like 2020, it'll be 2030 before we finally see some of these cheeses that have been sitting on the shelves actually sold for consumer consumption. So it's kind of mind-boggling how long some of these cheeses actually will cure and age. And obviously, a cheese that sits that long, it's pretty safe to assume that it's going to have a pretty robust flavor and aroma to it. Now there could be cheeses though that are pressed today that they're going to be shipped out tomorrow already. So again, it just depends on the type of cheese that we would be trying to make. Okay, so at this time, we are going to stop our notes and we are going to watch a video clip from the TV show How It's Made about how you can actually make cheese. And this one is really cool because it's going to walk us through how they make mozzarella, because that tends to be a pretty popular cheese for many of us, because if we've ever eaten pizza, we've pretty much had mozzarella cheese. So it's just fun to see all of these steps that we've been talking about actually in process of happening. So we're going to pause our notes right now and we're going to take a look at the cheese video. Okay, now that we finished our cheese video, what we're gonna do is we're gonna go on a cheese hunt within our homes. So I want you to go to your kitchen. I want you to find all of the kinds of cheese that you have in your fridge, freezer, cupboard, and or pantry, depending on what setup you have at home. And here's a side note. If you do not have any cheese currently within your home space, not a problem. You can still do this activity. I want you to just make a list of all your favorite types of cheese. So just list off the ones that you've eaten before that you've really enjoyed, okay? Now, what you're going to do is you're going to go to the Jamboard for our class period. So first things first, find that Jamboard. Then you are going to make a sticky note for yourself. You are going to put your name on top of that sticky note. And then what I want you to do is list off all of the cheeses that you found. Okay. So if you were able to find some in your fridge, cupboard, pantry, freezer, wherever, I want you to list them on the sticky. Now, again, if you don't have cheese at home right now, then just make a list of all of your favorite cheeses on your sticky note, okay? There's an example in the Jamboard, so let's go take a look at that right now, and that'll give you a better idea of, oh, okay, yeah, these are some things that maybe I could find too in my own home space. So let's go have a look.